Dear friends and supporters of the Käte Hamburger Center for Advanced Study Law as Culture, chère Diana, chers amis et supporters de Law as Culture. C'est un plaisir particulier de vous accueillir aujourd'hui. Nous sommes toujours dans une situation de pandémie dans laquelle Jean Castex, par exemple, se profile comme éternel monsieur déconfinement. C'est rigolo, je trouve. Mais au moins, nous avons atteint le point où vous allez enfin arriver à Bonn mardi prochain et animer notre paysage de discours bonnois. Nous en sommes très heureux. Mais tout d'abord, nous avons l'occasion de faire l'expérience d'une conférence sur votre propre sujet de recherche, qui s'inscrit merveilleusement dans notre thème de recherche et notre conférence d'il y a 2 semaines, à savoir Contra Legem Orders, a study on normative culture of transgression. But who is, vous avez tout compris, you have understood everything. I just said hello, that was everything I said in the end. But who is that young lady who will speak to us in a minute? Dr. Diana Villegas studied law at the University Pontificia Bolivariana a Medellin, Colombia, and the University of Paris II, Panthéon-Assas. Subsequently, Diana worked as a researcher and lecturer at the universities of Paris I. Alors, il faut toujours faire la distinction entre Paris I et Paris II. C'est une coupure assez grave et importante, Panthéon-Sorbonne. Puis, afterwards, Paris II, Panthéon-Assas, and Paris XIII. Sorbonne, Paris Nord, among others. And this is rather important because it is at the center of teaching and doing legality, normativity, of doing law in France. In 2016, her thesis on l'ordre juridique mafieux, étude à partir du cas de l'organisation criminelle colombienne des années 1980 et 1990. So this wonderful title is not a title of nothing, but it is a book behind, and it was honored with an impressive list of prizes. It is too long in order to be reminded now, but the prix Choukri Kardai de l'Académie des sciences morales et politiques is important. The prix de thèse Dalloz en droit privé is also an important one, as well as the trophy Les Insolites du droit, Cercle K2, and the prix Giovanni Falcone. We know who Falcone is and why the prize might have been very important for you. From 2016 to 2017, you worked as a researcher in the European Union's Pro-Use Justice project. Since 2017, then, Dr. Diana Villegas has been a researcher and lecturer, maître de conférence in civil and criminal law, a rather unusual combination for the German context, who, among us, the jurists, would do really and teach civil law and penal law in the same time, but supplemented by the fact that she is also part of the filière de droit public to teach also public law. So this is completely unthinkable in the German context. At the University of Paris II, Panthéon-Assas, where a new chair entitled Law and Culture has been institutionalized, if I got it right. And you're the holder of this chair. Is that also right? Wonderful. Congratulations to have brought the topic of law and culture into the world, even to Paris. Since May 2022, Dr. Diana Villegas has been a fellow at our center. So this subject of her lecture may be paraphrased as follows. Can the studies on the normative structure of mafia organizations, the topic of her thesis, be transferred to other types of social communities that the state does not like to see so much and that are directed against the state order. For instance, independence movements, revolutionary orders, hacker communities, organizations from contemporary protest and civil disobedience groups, and so forth. Is it possible then to find an approach in the analysis of mafia normativity, as I would say, in order to better grasp these appearances and their normativities? Consequently, they are often excluded, marginalized, or ignored from the classic legal theory. But you propose to move on and expand the study of the relations between law and social orders. But where to find some reference point in the large field of, I would like to say, critical legal studies? Legal pluralism, legal culture studies, and legal consciousness studies are very useful framework, perhaps, to understand the interactions of these orders, how they reshape the state structures and social normativities in general. I know that you distinguish two perspectives, a dynamic one and a static one, when it is about the efficiency of those social orders. To analyze societies, in any case, from the standpoint of dynamics and statics, this is the lesson of Auguste Comte that I try to read into your description of the program. But before starting with your talk, let me mention the fact that you are also an art director. Your short film, À la frontière, had been shown at Cannes to win a prize, if I remember well. So much the more, once again, soyez la bienvenue au Centre Droit comme Culture, chère Diana. C'est à vous maintenant de présenter votre projet.
Merci beaucoup à tous. Thank you very much for this invitation. I'm really happy to be with you, and I'm really happy to come to the center the next week and to share all this research with the local research at the center. And also, I'm really happy to present this work in progress about Contra Legem orders, who was inspired by my thesis research. But before that, I have to say a little thing. I want to make a sweet talk about the climate situation in your region. I know that it's really hard right now, and un petit pensée, we say in French, for all the victims, and I hope that your relatives and family are okay. And I'm sorry.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for that attention.
And I'm sorry, my English is not very good because French took all the place in my linguistic culturation. But I'm going to do a really slow presentation, and I hope everything is going to be clear. And if not, we can share some questions at the end if I think we have the time. Well, we can start with this topic. It's a really hard one because I study violence, illegality in the legal orders, and it's not that common to explore this kind of topics because, as Professor Gebhardt said, as a legal scholars, we are forget that these orders can be part of the legal systems also and can reshape the legal system. And right now, what I'm proposing is moving from my Mafia legal order research, who was my PhD research, and move to the Contra Legem orders, like expanding the theoretical and methodological approach to finally propose you a theory of illegal orders. That's the at that point, I'm in this middle way of this thinking and research. My PhD was about Mafia, who is a illegal and contra legal order, and it was very, very specific one. But this topic showed me that we can think more in a more large way this kind of orders and reintegrate these orders in the legal studies, in the critical legal studies, but also in the cultural legal studies and in the sociology of law. And after that, the main project is to build, maybe it's a very ambitious, but to build or rethink a theory of illegal orders and how they make some relationships with the state order. For that, I used to do a framework in legal pluralism, but it's not just classical legal pluralism. I propose to use very large definition of legal pluralism, like Cotterell, like Sally Ferry-Moore, and the legal pluralism from anthropology and sociology of law. Also, a framework from legal culture and legal cultural studies and legal consciousness studies, like Susan Sylvia, Patricia Ewick propose. I think that is going to be useful to rethink this kind of orders and organizations. Legal geography is also a main point in this kind of research. And at the end, linking on using my examples, I think that use social movement theory could be also important. But that's the main and the theoretical framework. I'm not going to be very specific about this because I'm going to show you some main points about my research, my thesis degree, and moving on to the fieldwork that I was doing the last year about these contra legem orders. Some concepts that I think they are really important to think about and is related to the main concept from the center is how do we think organizations and communities and how these communities and organizations can be or become legal orders. At the start point of my thesis, this kind of concept was really important because I used to work with the criminal organization, but at that point, in a sociological way, we have to switch to see how these organizations switch to a really social order who becomes also a legal order. And that was a really main concept that was really present at the research. Also, another question was about juridicity. The main question was to say, is the Mafia order a legal order, like state order, or is another kind of juridicity? And at that point, I was really preoccupied because we don't have in a legal study theory main concept of law and juridicity. We used to explain law with always working concept of law or stipulative law, and it's really difficult to work in an epistemologic way with this kind of concepts. And at that point, I remarked that the legal criteria was really flu, like really unstable. And also the question about normativity or juridicity and how this order, this illegal order can switch or not from a normativity step to a juridicity step. That was my main questions in a theoretical way. But why do we get interested in this kind of orders as a legalist research, as a legal scholars? Well, I think that we must really we must really be careful with this kind of orders, because we are all the time in legal pluralism. We are regarding the state and also some legal orders that doesn't bother the state law, but illegal ones can show us and can teach us a lot about legal state order and also about society itself. And we can see that illegal and Contra Legem orders can produce law and become also at that point legal order if we use a legal pluralist theory or really large legal pluralist theory. And at that point, we can also test some legal pluralist theory with this kind of methodological and epistemological theory. And also this kind of orders can we show us that the dichotomies that we use in law are so superficial. And we also think that the law is between pacific and violence, legal and illegal, progressive and democratic and anti-democratic. But the illegal orders and Contra Legem orders can show us that these kind of dichotomies are more than the three spheres than the opposite spheres. And at the end, and as I think that is the most important, one of the most important things that can show us the study of this kind of phenomenon is how we rethink the concept of law. And we can, this kind of orders or legal orders can show us or can lead us to move on in a postmodern concept of law that we can use a normative approach, but also and mostly a non-normative approach. That means that we can use a symbolic and a discursive dimension in law that we used to forget as a legal theorist or legal scholars. And I think that legal pluralism combined with illegal and Contra Legem orders can show this kind of plurality of notions and concepts and phenomena that fits more like to the reality and explain better the law and how law interacts with reality. And that's why I begin my research with Mafia, who was a really challenging subject, but also was a really good, a beautiful research journey with so many years of research. And I combined all this framework and all these kind of concepts, and I remarked that Mafia is an organization and also a community that has its own rules and codes and hierarchy, but also is an organization who places itself at the in a parallel way from the state, and sometimes it's mafia get against the state, but it's not all the time. Most of the time, the mafia is interested to get complex relations, the cooperation with the state. And as we see, it's an illegal organization. But this organization, in a sociological way, can be also a legal order with these codes, rules, and laws. And at that point in the research that I made, I remarked that mafia is a really good source of law because he becomes a new legal order. And also, mafia can reveal us new form of legal pluralism because with the interaction and relationships with other or social orders, they expose the other kind of legal pluralism. I show you the book that I wrote at the end of this thesis degree, and also the film if you want to see the final data of my fieldwork. It's a really good way to present the data, and it was a really good, a beautiful work that I did with other colleagues. At that point, I think that we can see legal orders in two ways: static perspective, like the order at itself, and we can study the order like a legal order at itself. But I think it's more interesting if we move on in a legal pluralism way and use a dynamic perspective. It means that we are going to focus in the relationships and the effects of these relationships between the orders in the society and in the actors, in the social actors, how they change because of this kind of relationships. And I remarked in my research that mafia as a legal order can reshape legal culture, legal state culture, but also the everyone legal culture in the quotidianity. Also, the legal consciousness alterations in the populations, but also in the legal actors. The methodology was a really original way because I mobilized judicial files that were in a bad shape at that moment, as you see in the photo. I do some interviews with judges, with journalists, people who live in the neighborhoods controlled by mafia, mostly two neighborhoods in Medellin. One neighborhood who was built by Pablo Escobar, and the other one who was the main point to spend the drugs to the United States in the 80s and 90s. And with this all file work, I also, because I'm a legal scholar, I was really interested in the study of legal rules and how the state responds to this kind of phenomenon with producing a lot of legal normativity. And the particularity was that this legal normativity was produced under the state of emergency, was really long, like 7 years. At that point, we can see that Mafia is a semi-autonomous social file, as Salif Al-Mouk and Stewart McCullough said. And when we see the statistics about drugs, we can see how important is this business and is this economic organization that can take a really good place to manage all the socioeconomic systems in the local and national, even transnational spheres. And at that point, I have to point that at the 80s and 90s, that was my research, the cocaine production was not that important that is important in this way, in these days. And we can see that today, this kind in this way, we can see how important is also today this kind of organization. And some criteria to determine it, but they are not like fixed, but we can determine some criteria from Mafia legal orders, like in its structure and functions. We can see that Mafia has its own methods, its own ethos, activities, behaviors, and also it has a political subjectivity. At that point in the 80s, Pablo Escobar was interested to get into political system, and he creates a political party. But he was really bad at doing political movements. That's why he prefers to do indirectly lobbying, and he creates a really good organization to do a mafia lobbying at the political and judicial states. And also this kind of organization can enjoy from the social legitimation because they have the money and they can do money laundering using donations and doing like caritative activities. But if we see Mafia as an static approach and it's an order itself, we can see that it has rules, economic rules and social rules. Like Mafia is also governed by the money, and that I found some other rules, implicit rules, but important for this kind of organization. The road rules. It means that all the traffic and cocaine roads are really, really regulated by the organization. We can sell, we can lend, we can buy a road to export the cocaine. And in this road and in this geographical sphere is the mafia the mafia as rules that governs this kind of road. Also, they make taxes like classical mafia. We call it in Colombia the vaccine, who tax like regular taxes from the farmers. Or grammage taxes is about how much we have to pay when we produce 1 kilo of cocaine. There are some regular taxes about that. And the social rules who can be resumed by this kind of expression, plata o plomo, money or guns. It's like we have to choose if we are in the corruptions or we can die. That's the two spheres and two extremes in the social rules of the mafia. But there are so many little rules that are more implicit and they guarantee a social cohesion inside the society. Is the little favors rule systems and a credit mafia system that they develop a lot in Colombia. I'm switching really fast because the main point is to get to the Contra Legem orders, but I can explain more carefully after if you want. I did a graphic about these norms who are implicit, but sometimes that can be explicit. They can be we can express this. We can see these norms or these rules in a through the values or through the decision the decision about the mafia. But that was a static approach. It's just like the order at itself and how it acts in between the members and between the society. But that was more important to me as a sociological in a sociology, legal sociology way, is the how can we show and do a cartography of the relationships between social actors and orders. And in Colombia, unfortunately, there are so many social actors who are in contact with the mafia legal order. And there are legal actors, but also illegal actors. And all the time when we think about Contra Legem orders and illegal orders as mafia, we think that the relationship is always in conflict way. But there is more interesting to get into other relationships like coordination, collaboration, and fusion relationships, because they say more about the orders and how they related to the society. And in that case, we can see that the orders are not like closed. They are in a permanently exchange between them, and they can reshape in this kind of relationship. Sometimes the state can be can call the paraetatics or the paralegal orders to get into the to get help to in the conflict in the mafia legal orders. And there are so many relationships in this kind of internormativity cartography. And also in this dynamic way, we can see the effects, how this kind of relationship, how can this kind of order affects the society, the legal culture, and how they affect also the citizens, the population in a local way. And I can say that the mafia as a legal and a socioeconomic order who has a really good power can reshape the state legal culture. He can do the state order became an authoritarian one because he wants to show the society that he has the tools to get into the conflict with the mafia legal orders. And for that, he develops a criminal law very who is not like very democratic. We also built a new and exceptional criminal system who call it faceless justice, who the persons who was in this kind of justice, they didn't know the identity of the judges. And we can see in this kind of judicial file, the judges was signed the file with a digital print and with a code. And also this kind of legal order, all the relationships we are very complex with the state, can show us that the state are going to produce a lot of normative rules, legal rules, but they are not effective. They have a symbolic effectiveness, but they don't have a reality impact in the society. And at that point, we can see how this mafia legal order can become an illegal one, but also a Contra Legem order. But it's just one among all the Contra Legem orders that we can see in the legal sphere. We can see that there are other legal orders, Contra Legem legal orders, who can go who wants to get in a conflict with the state legal order, like revolutions. But there are also the Contra Legem order who are very little ones, and they want just reshape in a democratic way the state rules or the state legal order. Sometimes they are in a clandestine way, or sometimes they are really they present themselves as a clear social order. And as I said, mafia is one of these Contra Legem orders, and it shows me that we can use this kind of panel, scientific panel, and scientific concepts and methodology to expand the legal concept of theory of law in using this kind of patterns to explore the theory of illegal orders. And we can see in this graphic how there are so many orders in the legal sphere. But today, I'm mostly interested to study some legal orders who are pacifics, but they are Contra legal orders, or the revolutions, or in a digital way, how these Contra Legem orders can manifest itself. And I was doing also mafia with my thesis and gangs, but today I'm moving on to other kind of Contra Legem orders. And that's why I proposed to the center to explore in my research today mostly three kinds of case studies. The sadist, who are a group of people who occupy the forest, contest the state law in a political way, and how the state law manage the land. The Catalonia independence movement, who is a linguistic and a political community who can become a really political order, even maybe a state, if their reivindication get heard. And hackers in a digital communities or if we see a digital order. And also another one, but I'm not going to speak about it, is anti-species groups. And for this kind of case studies, I use almost the same methodology, the same scientific protocol that I use for my thesis, like using legal rules, judicial review, but also fieldwork. These kind of orders or Contra Legem orders that I propose to study in my research, they are not clandestine illegal orders. They are really in a reivindication confronting the state law, but they don't present in a clandestine way. They have their own internal legal culture. And I'm going to show you how they act using just one of these case studies. They are usually seen as orders or communities of the law, like legal outsiders or borderline legal orders. And sometimes in the cultural studies, we can see that they are thinking like subcultures or emerging subcultures. But that doesn't tell us how important are these legal orders for mapping the landscape of law. And in that case, I use this kind of methodology to think about representation, how they represent the law and the orders, how they speak about the law, and how they practice state law or maybe other kind of rules. And as I said, I'm going to show you just one little example based on the SAD, the son à défendre. And I was studying the last year this space and this community who is in the Nantes region at the north of the France, and they occupy this zone because they wanted to stop the build of international airport, and this zone is like ecological zone, and a farmer and an important zone for the farmers. So at that point, they begin to occupy this zone in the early 2000, and in 2008 they won the fight against the state, and since there they are doing some events and like Congress, who invites all the population to know how they live and how they are building a new form of living the rules and the land. And I was there the last year, and they did like this event. We invite all other organizations, political organizations, and movements. Inside this tent, we can share like other kind of mobilization, like environmental ones, farmers and neo-farmers, socioeconomic right movements, migrants, gilets jaunes, homeless people. Donc, these are really, as Jan Marschelken, I really want to thank Jan because he told me about this concept. It's like a multi-community or a community of communities. Donc, we can see that the SAD is more than a geographical zone. It's a really good space, a social space, where we can see all these kind of communities, in how they interact and exchange practices, discourses, and representations about normativity and legal rules. Well, I list all these kind of movements who were present at that day, and they can show us how the opposition against the state and against the transgression can be done. They can resist at the law, they can get protest, but also it gets in transgression. And all of this around this topic about how we can manage the land in another way. They can do like individual and collective resistance, but also micro resistance and a large resistance and collectivity resistance. Maybe the most important in a legal pluralism way is how these kind of groups can do like a sedimentation of the cultural norms. They have a really specific practice about how they use the land and in a collective way, and they want to be recognized by the state law in this kind of dynamic uses. They have a proper management of this kind of land who wants to cultivate, and they get into a fight for this kind of practice. They are even really organized. They have a general assembly, they have a legal committee and a habitat committee. They are really, really organized. We can see that sometimes when we look at this kind of organization, we think that they are really disorganized, but they are really, really organized that, in their objective to use the land. And one of these kind of sedimenters of their cultural norms, that we can see how they can propose a new kind of concepts to the law and to the urban state law. And sometimes they get in a dialogue to the local authorities to get recognized in their own norms and their own ways to manage the land. And in this process, we can see how new normative and narrative about law are present in these kind of groups. Even Bruno Latour who is a really good sociologist in France, was interested in this kind of manifestation because we can see how local, national, and international spheres converge in this kind of manifestation and Contra Legem orders. And they are going to have an impact in this kind of spheres, not just the land in this zone, but also in international way, because they communicate with other social movements and they contest all these kind of mega projects or international projects to build an airport or to build other kind of buildings. And in this kind of relationship, we can see how this Contra Legem order, they get against the state and they contest the effect of globalization with another kind of see the land, but also the local sphere. And in this interaction with the state, but with the other communities and the other social movement and other orders, they are reshaping the state legal norm and orders. And they are also inspiring other social movements. And we can see how the legal and social knowledge about practices and discourses can circulate between these communities. Well, I can show you some reference from the interviews and how they live and take care of the space. That's why it's important to see this local zone as a really large space where these people are creating new norms and they are fighting to get recognition from the state. And in this kind of relationship, we can see that the relation with the state law is more like we said here in France, je t'aime moi non plus. It's like we want the state law, but also we are in a complex way to see the state law because we are in a conflict and we are against this kind of state law, who is not democratic for them and who is injustice at some point, but they also make some concessions and some dialogue with the state law. And they recognize the technicity, the technical degree of the state law, but they also manage some terms and tools to fight their political objectives also in the inside the courts. And also they can exchange about law and legal experience between this kind of movement. And that was really interesting to see how they exchange this kind of practice about legal experience. Now, sometimes they have to fit into the law, like accept to get permits to build in the land, but sometimes they are also against the state law. And in that way, that's what I say, that the Contra Legem orders are in this relationship, the je t'aime moi non plus, with the state law. They are also developing some instrumental and strategic use of state law when they see that the state law can provide some tools. They don't hesitate to use them. And at that point, the state law can respond, and they can have some reflex. They can do repressions or avec criminal law. It can be indifferent from this kind of social movement, but the most important today is that this kind of movement are bringing some topics to the state law as the commons or the collectivity property, or also how we can use a state of necessity to be recognized and to get on responsibility in a criminal way. And in that kind of context, we can see that the legal state can also use another dynamic. They don't use, the state doesn't use just legal normativity in a positive way. They can use also ethics and science and technology with like reports, scientific reports, and we can see that there are more complex interaction in this kind of sphere. And in this kind of example, we can see how the people can be or can develop another kind of legal consciousness. It can be placed before the law, with the law, but also and mostly against the law. And they are really conscious about the law and how it can provide some tools. And in that kind of mechanism, we can see that the people are really empowered about this kind of discourses at that point that they reivindicate that the people who live the territory are the people who can dream the rules of this kind of territory. And in that kind of think of way, we can see how Contra Legem orders are really rich and how they can show us how the legal sphere can be more large that we think when we study this kind of Contra Legem orders. In that kind of cases, we can open the Pandora boxes. Well, I did it with Mafia legal order, but right now we can move to the Contra Legem orders and study other Contra Legem orders to build this kind of theory of illegal orders. And that's why I propose to expand the concept of the theory of legal orders. Well, I think that I use all my time, and I really thank you very much for your attention, and I hopefully be clear about that. And if you have some question, I'm really happy to answer them.
So thank you very much, Diana. It was a pleasure to listen to you, and even if you took nearly an hour, we followed your explanations with a lot of curiosity, and perhaps some of us even with admiration, I would say, to bring this really extreme example of a mafia that is interesting for legal theory because of the fact that against any kind of obvious face evidence, there is an inner structure in those organizations that resemble, at least very much, to other types of orders that we declare to be filled, so to say, with legality. And this resemblance, but also the differences, might be a topic for our talks. And then the second step, at least, to make the proposition to analyze some types of organizations and communities that we know under the headings of new social movements, for example, have not always, but sometimes even the inner intention to change the normative framework in which they work, and they even tend at doing some kind of changes in the dynamics of normative orders. So what we can learn from studying Mafia in order to understand better new social movements might shock all those who, for example, in this circle, are members of those social movement. I'm rather sure that some of us have worked in these contexts and would not like very much to be compared to mafia structures. And I think that those religious people among us who are even part of the Catholic Church would not like very much, because of the fact that the omerta, for example, is very much widespread in the Catholic Church, would like to have seen this kind of comparison. So I think there is a lot of provocation in your talk still, and it would be nice to make clear that this provocation will have an epistemological effect in the end. That's at least a way of making things more strange, as the classical example by Emil Durkheim always has been. The normality of crime. It is against our first view and interpretation of legal orders and the compliance with the law that Durkheim was the first one to say that there is a positive function in deviance. And as I understand your talk, I would say there is a kind of transfer from this dynamic and revolutionary power of deviance of individuals to the level of communities and their specific normative orders. If there are derivations, they may have functions that go beyond just to be illegal, but may even make contributions to the symbolic legality and the symbolic understanding of the legal system as such. This would be a little bit my interpretation. I have to stop here because there are people much, much brighter than me, and please start your questions if you do not want to react directly, perhaps later on. Who will ask the first question? So the first one is Niall Bond, then I see Raphael, and there had been somebody else who will come later. So, vas-y, cher ami.
Okay, thank you very much for a very enlightening and very instructive and very stimulating presentation in which legitimacy can be shown to apply to absolutely any organization, which I think that Max Weber would have gone along with. I'm wondering to what extent the calculability and the regularity of sanctions plays into your reasoning when establishing whether something is a normative order or is a legal order. I mean, do you feel that when you investigate the mafia, people are aware that for such and such an offense to the hierarchy, you will have simply a leg broken, whereas for another more severe offense, you find yourself wearing cement shoes at the bottom of a river? I'm just wondering whether the calculability of sanctions and the transparency of sanctions plays any role in your analysis of whether something constitutes an alternative legal order?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Thank you. Because the people, when I asked about when I was in the fieldwork, I didn't tell them that I was working with the mafia as a legal order. That was like unthinkable to do that in Colombia. But when we talk about the situation and how they get in the relationship with the gangs, local gangs, with the mafia gangs, and with the mafia activities, they are like how do you say? They are like looking the mafia as a powerful organization who gets better than the state. They recognize the state law and the state, obviously, but the state is not present in these kind of territories. And not that way, the organization take place, and they get juxtaposed to the state law and the state organization. And even they can manage the two kind of organization. And they don't verbalize that it's like a legal order, like the state. But in the discourses, they can show us how important is this order, even more important in their life than the state law.
May I intervene? If I understood right, but you will say yourself, excuse me, but the threatening effect of the omerta, or the breaking of the omerta, for example, is that you do not know exactly what will happen. You may die, or perhaps just lose your spouse. Well, you don't know. So I think the more violence is more powerful when it is not clear what kind of member of your body will be affected. And I think terroristic systems are just working, and there is terror behind, of course, in order to implement this kind of order, of normative order, as you say, has to do with the non-calculability. That's my suspicion, but I'm not very sure. I never worked in this kind of organization and have never been a consigliere. By the way, you don't spoke about the consiglieres who are always jurists.
Yeah. And also we have a lot of like kind of this phenomenon of foreign shopping. They do a lot of foreign shopping, not just the member of the mafia, but mostly the society, the actors, or the people who live in the neighborhoods who are controlled by the mafia power. And in that case, the calculability about how kind of rule I'm going to follow is very present, but is implicit and maybe unconsciousness in this kind of society.
So next speaker would be Rafael Wawrzynski.
Yeah, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. Yeah, it was very rich presentation. There's so much interesting stuff in it, but I have a few small comments combined with questions. First is maybe I start with a general comment on this concept of Contra Legem orders. My impression is, and this is already somehow in your project, that in fact it's a bunch of quite different normative regulatory orders, as I would call it, and there are some key factors that diversify this whole bunch of different orders. And I think one is what I would call normative aspiration or normative regulative aspiration. So to what extent, because you could expand it much farther, you could take some, let's say resistance movements which try to overthrow the government, and then basically their aspiration is to become an alternative state and displace the present day state. And so that's what probably will happen in Afghanistan when Taliban take over and the present government is gone. And on the other hand, you have this kind of communities like this. Wait, I have to look how they are called. This Lesak, which Well, in a sense, they try to construct a new and different normative order, but they are also in many interactions with the official order. And I would say they are also embedded in a very specific state order, which is characterized by a very high level of civilization in a strict sense by Elias. That, I suppose if they occupy land where Mr. Escobar would like to build something in Colombia, it would take a very different route, this conflict. And I suppose that maybe some kind of violent people would appear there with machine guns, and there would be a bloodshed. I mean, I don't know much about Colombia, but that's my hunch from studying organized crime groups in Russia and also reading some literature on Mexico. So there were these cases, at least in Mexico, where some, activist groups were murdered or slaughtered by some drug cartels. So basically you have very different movements or different communities which aim at some kind of Contra Legem order, but you also have a very different embeddedness in terms of what kind of state institutions they interact with. And this brings me to one point, which is just a theoretical question, because you study somehow this relationship between organized crime, but also other types of non-state normative orders and the state orders as they exist. So do you engage somehow with the theory of Charles Tilly and his ideas about state making and war making and as organized crime, which shows this transition over a long period of time, how actors who behaved like organized crime groups then became states in Europe. And the last question is about the benefit, and this is a very general theoretical discussion about the concept of legal pluralism and alternatives, something what's proposed by Brian Tamanaga as normative pluralism, that you have different types of normative orders, but not all normative orders are legal. And the differences were already mentioned in the question asked by Neil Bond, that for maybe you don't have such a developed system of calculability. I would also add the argument from Roger Cottrell, who says the most specific characteristic of state and quasi-state legal orders is the existence of an extensive legal doctrine. And the question is, do, for example, mafia organizations have complex systems of philosophical thought to justify their, I mean, they have some thought, but do they meet the criterion of legal doctrine? So this would be my thoughts on your very, very inspiring and very rich presentation. So thanks once again for this presentation.
Thank you very much, because you point the main or the core question, theoretical question of this kind of orders. It's not easy to answer that because we have to make a theoretical decision. I'm going to try to respond to the three questions, and it's exactly I begins with the mafia legal order, and right now I'm expanding the theoretical and methodological research to see if we can use the same research protocol to other orders who place it in sometimes in an illegal way, sometimes in a violent also way, but they are not that violent or illegal as mafia. And at that point, we can see that they are, maybe we can, at the end of the research, I can do like some transversal criteria who can apply to all these orders, or maybe not. I'm not sure yet, But the most important is to rethink about illegal orders in a socio-legal theory, because I have this feeling that we forget to get into this point, because almost all the studies about legal pluralism are focused on pacific and normative and like friendly orders. And I try to go to the file battle and look into this kind of order who nobody wants to see because they are so illegal, so repressive and anti-democratic, but they can show you more a lot of things about us, about legal states, and also other legal orders. And in that kind, to me, this kind of question, what is law, how we think normative and legal order, how we can do the difference. Is there a criteria who can show us that there is a difference? And I say that was a really good question and a really hard question during my thesis degree. And I said that at some point we can have this all theoretical panoramic way of thinking, but on the fieldwork we can see that sometimes it's not like that, and sometimes it's like a continuum. The people and the orders can switch to the legal and normativity, and they don't ask themselves this question. But we, as a theorist, we have to ask this question. And I'm getting this position of where I'm working as a legal theorist. I'm also an old lawyer, and I really attach it to the juridicity notion. And I can tell that these kind of orders are more like a classical normative orders. In that way, I get interested to do the effectiveness criterion more than the validity, or more than the normative, like positivity criterion. And in that case, I think that effectivity of the order, not the rule, but the order, can be a good criterion. But it's also a criterion who is really problematic, because we have not get agree in the academic sphere how is the best criterion to define law and normativity, and it's really difficult to do that. And also, yes, I use sometimes Charles Tilly theory, who is really helpful to think this kind of order, mostly Mafia ones. I don't know if maybe I can expand this explanation with the other question, but it's a really good question. It's a really good main core question. And at that point, I think that we can move from this kind of theoretical question about juridicity and legal criterion to more get into the relationships, a more dynamic way to look at the orders and how they can show us a legal pluralism who is in a horizontal way and not in a hierarchical way to think law.
I don't saw an answer to one question that was implicit in Raphael's questioning. That is there some kind of legal theorizing within Mafia orders? Do you have this type of dogmatics, jurisprudent way of thinking about the normativity of this specific illegal order? Does it exist in a way that it is explicitly outspoken in specific situations when a certain rule is applied. For example, the omerta rule. You know, there is the rule that, and this is part of our self-understanding, it is the main order that you always have to follow and to obey. If not, you are no longer a member, and not to be a member because you don't understand what omerta means, logically means you have to be killed now. That's the logic of the omerta. And for example, would you just say this type of explanation is part of the legal procedure, the normative procedure, illegal one?
Yes, I remarked that in Colombia when I was doing my thesis degree, that sometimes in some regions or some neighborhoods, they call the mafia rules at the first time, because they know that the state is not present, the state law is not effectiveness, and that doesn't work. Mafia or local gangs are more effective in that kind of sanctions or coercibility. But also they can do like mediations between like a family conflict. Yes, it's a really good stock of normativity in the regions where the mafia get installed. And sometimes there is no state law, there is no way to get to the state law. It's just mafia or even guerrilla or paramilitary order. That's where they combine sometimes the three normative or legal orders.
May I
okay, thank you very much. Raphael, once again, and Matthias Weller is behind, but he's waiting, polite as he is in general. But then it's your turn afterwards. Yeah.
Just briefly, because I think these are two different issues. One is effectivity. That's clear what you mean by this. But here is the question: if there is some kind of conceptual constructs that legitimize these activities which are so effective. I can tell you an example from a research by a Russian colleague who studied what he calls violent entrepreneurs, so different types of organized groups reaching from police units to gangsters and former inmates, etc., so-called vory v zakonie. So there was a situation in a marketplace, there was a conflict between two traders, and then they came to this, and he interviewed also this violent entrepreneurs. It was very difficult, but he really spoke to the gangsters. And they told him, they were surprised, they didn't know what to do, because suddenly two traders came who were working in a marketplace which they controlled, and they say, well, okay, guys, you are the bosses here, and we have a conflict, otherwise, we burn down our stalls or whatever. And the interesting thing was that these people, this violent entrepreneurs were overwhelmed. They didn't know what to do. Why should they bother with them? They thought, okay, we are the bosses, we collect the money, but why should we deal with this conflict? And this would be the starting point if they start thinking about that. We have also a role to regulate what these people do in our marketplace, even if it doesn't directly affect our interests, although indirectly it can affect, because if you have a conflict of traders, then it may become problematic for your entire marketplace, and you will get less racket in the end. So the question is, are these actors also doing some kind of conceptual works? Because these ZAT people, they obviously do. You showed publications that they really develop something like a normative doctrine, which tries to legitimize the order that they implement in contrast to the order that is implemented by the French state. But is there something similar, or can you observe something like this in mafia organizations? Yeah, thank you.
in Mafia, organization is more like a variable. It depends. It depends of the region, it depends of the members, and it depends of the conflict. Sometimes there are some conflicts who the proceeding is really regulated and we can anticipate, and we can know how it's going to end and how they are going to act. But sometimes that is not that clear. It depends of the chief or the decision. And also I remarked that at some points they don't use the violence. They prefer to regulate conflicts in a pacific way, because violence costs a lot to the mafia and to this organization. And even I can say the mafia at some points was really organized in this kind of proceedings in normative way. They I don't show you this kind of tracts or flyers that they get into the neighborhoods, like to do their rules, to follow some rules. But sometimes that is really implicit way to communicate and to regulate some conflicts. At the national level, when they were really organized, and they are like a political organization who dialogues with the state, even that they do the proposition, they do lobbying in front of the legal institutions. But I can say that mafia is less organized in this kind of normative proceedings than guerrilla or paramilitary. They are really organized. They have even like a really good, really not good, but really a structured system of justice. And they have really clear rules about members and outsiders of the organization. And I can tell that mafia is less organized in this kind of way than guerrilla or paramilitary organizations.
Now I see Matthias Weller, who has raised his hand for asking a question, making a comment.
Thank you, Diana, for a really fascinating presentation, very thought-provoking. While I was listening, I was asking myself, Contra Legem order, that it would imply to me, but correct me if I'm wrong, that the contra legal order is still not the dominant one. And it was a very instructive part of your presentation to me that you reflected on less dominant, but increasingly growing legal orders as opposed to the currently dominant one. So a first question of mine is a rather technical one, but also, I believe, a practically important one. When is the point where the growing legal order takes over and can be considered as being dominant? Because this question also occurs when there is a situation of occupation of one force by another one in a territory. And so we do have these questions of when does a legal order take over just by its own overwhelming dominance as opposed to a previous legal order? That would be one question I've always struggled with when I looked at theories like proposed by Robert Alexi and other people who worked on this question. So what would be your view on that? Because that would be my second question. We are certainly looking at a very specific and special legal order when we look at mafia and drug cartels. And there, my question would be, you were referring to these normative orders as legal orders. Maybe it's just a question of terminology, and but my intuition is a bit different, if I may say it that way. To me, these are certainly not legal orders. They may be normative orders, but they are not legal orders. I'm coming from the legal field, so I'm a maybe more conservative person looking at legal theory. But let me remind ourselves of one, at least, a powerful theory of law that implies a kind of legitimacy, an aspiration to implementing the right order. Yeah, of course, I know there is a lot of debate on that. There is legal pluralism and postmodernism, but maybe I may make the claim here that too much of postmodernism is maybe a little bit too much. And I would say that the legal orders we were introduced to tonight are no legal orders. And they may tell us something about legal orders by showing us what is not a legal order. And maybe they even show us what is not a state presenting a legal order or having a legal order. I'm a little bit provocative in that respect, but I'm very much looking forward to your view. What is law in your understanding? I gathered that it is a kind of sociologist approach, of course. I'm aware of that, but what is your comment then on the legitimacy question, on the morality question, if I may put it that way, when we come to a legal order? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, because it's a really good and hard questions to answer. Yes, this kind of orders, mostly SAT1 and Catalonia, for example, are not dominant, and they fight against a state law because, or a state legal order, because they are not that. It's not that democratic and inclusive legal order, and they want a new legal order or the same one, but to more inclusive and more justice. But about Mafia is different because Mafia doesn't want the state power. Mafia is really good with the state, and they it's like a parasite. They want the state to be there, but they want to go on with the activities and with the dominate some partial territories and partial spheres. And in that kind of way, Mafia is more, the relationship between state and Mafia are more complex than the other Contra Legem orders. And when you ask me about what is the point to switch, sometimes, for example, the revolutionary orders or like the independence movements get really into this kind of dynamic to get out the state legal order and to build a new state legal order or a new order. Maybe this kind of order is not that democratic or not, it's not that kind of justice, but it becomes a legal order who is in place. And at that kind of point of view, I dissociate the justice and the democratic point of view of these orders from the effectivity and the capacity to dominate and to install an order in a place. And we can see how some orders and state legal orders are in place even if they are not democratic. And that's why the dichotomy about democratic, anti-democratic are useful to build utopic and a desirable legal state order. But the reality is more complex, and the legal orders are not just like black and white, they are more complex. And that's why this kind of orders can show how it's difficult to do the difference. In that case, I can answer about the legal pluralism. And I choose to place in a legal pluralism who is really plural. He's an horizontal one for me, all the orders are able to become a legitimate and dominate order. Moral and values are important if I'm how to say, a progressist and democratic lawyer. And it's really important to me that the state, really justice and democratic states get dominance or get in the front of the sphere. But I have to recognize as a sociologist of law that the reality can be really disappointed. And in that kind of way, we can say that the definition of law, in that kind of way, I can tell that I have like two hats. When I plea in front of the court as a lawyer, obviously I'm going to defend the most justice and democratic law that I want to be applied. But as a sociologist of law, I have to admit that the legal pluralists can be really open and can be look at this kind of legal or this kind of orders that I call it legal orders because they get the power to be at that point. That is a theoretical position based in this kind of framework that I explained you. But I can tell you that doesn't change a lot if you think that Mafia is a normative or legal order. But what is important is the dynamic point and the relationships and the effects of this relationship or this order, we can call it normative or legal, in the community and in the how they reshape the landscape of law. That was very important to me.
Thank you very much.
So this is, I think, a rather important clarification. So if you have nothing against calling this so-called legal order a normative order, then I think much more in this circle might follow your analysis than if you really take the value-loaded concept of the law, attribute it and see it attributed to this horrible system. Let me say this, very value-loaded from a point of view where the follow-up question would be, what about, and there we are not in a time of a minority system, but a majority system of legal order, namely of Nazi legal non-culture. So, and Juan, the same moment when you received your prize, received the prize for his book about Nazi so-called law. So what, how can we really make this type of distinctions without doing some kind of value judgments concerning legitimacy and the content of the normative expectations, as Luhmann would say, that in the end, when they are contrafactually stabilized, fulfill the conditions of being a legal order. So what would you say to the question of Nazi law, for example?
I know the research, the Olivier Jean-Jean, exactly, that he was really good and really inspiring research. And he's at the opposite, I think, because the legal Nazi order was like a legitimate by the as a state legal order, and in a positive way of thinking, there was just there, but it became like injustice, and the values who defend were horrible. But the theory of the positivity of law, and even Hans Kelsen can defend this kind of order. because it's a formal or legal order as a state. But the problem with Mafia, it doesn't have this kind of legitimacy in the authority, but it becomes legitimate by the people who follow this kind of order, and because of the power, the economic and social power that he can build. But as I said, it's really difficult to say that it's a state order, but because he recognized the state law, but it just used in a strategic way the state law to be in place and to do all the business and to make the normative and the rules apply as it wants.
Thank you very much. Much more clarification, at least to me personally. Next question from Stefano.
Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you, Diana, for this beautiful presentation. It was really fascinating. By the way, it's a long-standing passion of mine, going back to Santi Romano. So that's why I found your presentation very fascinating. And I wanted to react. I mean, it's not really a question to you, but more a reaction to what Professor Villegas said, and coming in support also to you. And I think it's important, what you said. From the positivist point of view, we shouldn't make the confusion. So positivism doesn't defend the idea that law should be immoral. I mean, even if you embrace a positivist point of view, you can clearly say that I want the law to be moral. And that's something that is relatively indisputable. But the problem is that if you go down the other path and you embrace more just naturalistic point of view, is that in the end you're going to suppress the different moralities that are present in every context. So I'm not entirely sure whether. Now, I posted this quotation by Saint Augustine that it was more ironical than other, but I mean, not because I want to be ironic with Saint Augustine, of course, but the point is really, when we go with the morality approach, I'm not sure where we begin and I'm not sure where we end. And which this is not to say that law should be moral. That's a completely different kettle of fish. So, but that was just a comment of mine, sorry.
Yeah, if I may add one sentence to that. Thank you so much, Stefano, for intervening. My hero, so to speak, would still be, in a way, Gustav Radbruch, for obvious reasons, who very closely connects, in a way, legalistic norms with not morality, but values and an aspiration for legitimacy. And of course, there are different positions on the notion of law. I'm very well aware of it, but maybe there is also some good reason for one notion of law more than for another notion of law. That's maybe the point I would like to raise and to maybe submit to a discussion, provoked by this brilliant presentation of yours, Diana, in which you, if I observed it correctly, presented the Mafia legal order as any kind of legal order that we could witness. It's the French legal order, it's the German modern legal order, post-Nazi, of course, and there may be the Mafia legal order. And there seemed to be no differences. You spoke about justice in this system. You spoke about legitimacy in this system, and you addressed it as a system of law. And to me, there is a kind of irritation in this vocabulary that comes up, coming from a very specific understanding of the notion of law. I'm aware of that, of course, and I know that there are others, but maybe there are good reasons for keeping up the connection between the notion of law and legitimacy, ideas of justice, and doing the right thing, implementing the right thing, whatever it is. Stefano, I'm absolutely aware of that. That's going to be difficult, but if we give up all aspiration or all claim on that, I would be hesitant to still speak of law personally, at least.
Yes, I know that it's like when I said sometimes it's like I open the Pandora box when I speak about legal order, mafia as a legal order, and that can be like provocative, but also it can be it's very difficult even to me because I'm a legal scholar. But also when I see what I was observing in Colombia, I can remark that at some point the classical theory is not enough to explain this kind of orders. And when I move from normativity to legal order, I choose to see this kind of phenomenon as like a continuum, and they are in an horizontal way because they have the power, the efficacy, the system. They build all the system to make like a concurrence with the state law. I wish that was different as a citizen, as a democratic legal scholar who wants to be values, but I see how this kind of order affects state law also, and how a state law get in it's not that strong to get at that point with this kind of orders. And another point, I choose to explore this legal pluralism because I said at some point that legal pluralism is also working with this kind of social order who are not dangerous, not they are pacific. But what about the others? What about these illegal ones? What about this violence, anti-democratic ones? We excluded them because just they are not in the same value system that we recognize. And at that point, as a scientist, I have a problem to be like to compartment these kind of orders. That's why I said, okay, we can put all this together in the same at the same stage, and obviously the state and democratic state legal order is not the same that mafia legal order, but sometimes I can observe that mafia can be more justice at some regulating some conflicts than the state legal ones. At that point, I don't have, I understand this question because, as I said, it doesn't matter if we call it legal or normative. I choose to call it legal because I can see this transformation and this continuum in between the social orders. But what is more important and in the pluralist legal theory is to look into the relationship and the effects that these kind of orders, violence, anti-democratic, told us about our legal systems, state legal systems. And they can show how these kind of legal systems are not that strong in a progressive way or in a justice way, because they can rebuild and reshape to this kind of orders and became very authoritarian state legal orders also.
I think this is really an absolutely fascinating debate. So if we remember what the state is in, for example, Bavarian terms as the monopoly of the legitimate use of violence, we still speak about violence in the state context. This is part of the definition. This is a constructive element of the definition of the state. that violence is used, or at least may be used. And so I think I could really understand if you take the Mafia case as a methodological tool and a pedagogical tool, and also as a kind of a type of estrangement. In German, you would say Verfremdungseffekt in the terms of Bertolt Brecht. So I can understand this, but for the rest, the question remains open whether we really have to subsume it under the concept of a law or not. And then, of course, we should talk about what we understand by law and where the value elements are introduced and are floating into the understanding of the legal sphere, of course. And this is, from the point of view of value-free judgments, of course, a problem in itself. And on the other hand, we would never like to avoid a judgment about Nazi law, for example, that this is not the concept of law we would like to follow up, because it excludes systematically and according to race criteria people. And this is not a respect for the other as a person. There is no person in concentration camps because there is no other. And this should be law. Okay. So, but a normative order, I would have no problem to say this, that there are normative orders, very strong and horrible normative orders according to their sanction systems, etc. And so much the more I think the notion that was used by Raphael, not of legal pluralism, that is misleading sometimes, but the normative pluralism, I think, is much more, is richer and allows to embrace not only the good orders that we know from the ecologists, but we lost a little bit the case of the ZAT in France near Nantes. What they really want, if they want to change the use of the land, what kind of Naturrecht is behind, of natural law is behind that idea, how the land may be used. I would like to thank you very much, everybody who participated in this very vibrant discussion. Excellent, really proposals, and I wish you a wonderful evening. It was really excellent. Thank you once more, and have a good night.